The Senate hearing chamber was heavy with tension, thick like the air before a storm breaks. Senator Tim Scott sat high on the panel, wearing a confident smile that cut through the formal setting with practiced ease. Across from him, positioned firmly at the witness podium, stood Representative Jasmine Crockett. Her burgundy blazer was flawless, her natural hair styled in elegant twists, and her eyes were sharp, focused, and ready for whatever came next. Every angle was captured by CSP's cameras, documenting what was quickly turning into one of the most heated confrontations in modern political history. Scott leaned into his microphone, his tone dripping with condescension. "Representative Crockett," he said, barely hiding his amusement, "I see here that you attended law school. Impressive. But I have to ask, did they actually teach you constitutional law, or were you busy with something else?" The room froze. A few shocked whispers escaped from the gallery. Scott's smile widened as if he believed he had delivered a knockout punch. Staffers in the back exchanged smirks, and some lifted their phones to record the moment. This was Tim Scott in his element, smooth, calculated, and convinced he had the upper hand. But Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. Her jaw tightened slightly, her eyes narrowed with precision, and everyone in the room sensed what was coming. She adjusted the microphone calmly, took a steady breath, and met Scott's gaze head-on. "Senator Scott," she said, her voice steady and sharp, "before we continue, let me make sure I understand your question correctly. Are you really sitting here challenging my law degree when you never even managed to pass the bar exam yourself?" The entire chamber erupted. Gasps rippled through the audience, reporters leaned forward, and Scott's confident grin vanished instantly. His face flushed red as cameras zoomed in, capturing every second of his shock. This wasn't just a comeback. It was a direct and devastating counterstrike. Before we break down the rest of this explosive exchange, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a single update on the political showdowns shaking Washington to its core. Now let's dive into how this battle escalated even further. Tim Scott had built his entire political reputation on being the Republican establishment's calm and reasoned voice. As the only black Republican senator, he positioned himself as a bridge between conservative values and the issues affecting black Americans. His smooth speeches and carefully managed public image made him a regular on Fox News, and a rising star often whispered about as potential presidential material. But behind the polished exterior was a man who had never practiced law, never argued a case, and never faced a real legal opponent capable of challenging his talking points with actual expertise. His political science degree had launched him straight into politics. No law degree, no bar exam, no courtroom experience. Yet here he was, questioning someone who had achieved all of those things. Jasmine Crockett was the opposite, genuinely credentialed. Raised in St. Louis, she put herself through Bowie State University, earned her law degree from the University of Houston, and passed the bar on her very first attempt, something Scott had never done. She worked as a civil rights attorney for years, taking tough cases others avoided and fighting for people who had no one else to stand up for them. She served in the Texas legislature and then in Congress, carrying real legal experience and battle-tested advocacy skills. She knew how to argue, present facts, and dismantle opposing positions piece by piece. And today, in the Senate hearing room, she was ready to show Tim Scott what a trained attorney looked like in action. This hearing wasn't routine political theater. It centered on voting rights legislation that could reshape the entire electoral landscape. Scott and his Republican colleagues were attempting to block a bill designed to expand early voting, implement automatic voter registration, and protect communities of color from long-standing voter suppression tactics. Crockett had been invited to testify as an expert witness, bringing both legal credibility and lived experience.
However, the host, clearly familiar with the viral clips, pressed him about why he questioned Crockett's credentials in the first place. "Look, I have tremendous respect for anyone who serves in Congress," Scott began, but the smooth confidence he once carried was gone. "We can disagree on policy without—" He trailed off, unable to finish. The confident, articulate Tim Scott, who had entered that hearing room, seemed replaced by someone who had just learned a hard lesson about underestimating a prepared opponent. His staff tried damage control, issuing statements about productive dialogue and focusing on key policy points, but every statement was immediately overshadowed by Crockett's devastating responses. The contrast was undeniable. Some Republican strategists suggested Scott should challenge Crockett to a formal debate to reclaim credibility, but those plans were quietly abandoned. Everyone knew the truth. He couldn't win against someone with years of courtroom experience. For Jasmine Crockett, the possibilities now seem limitless. She has proven she can stand toe-to-toe with seasoned politicians, showcased legal expertise few in Congress possess, and demonstrated she won't back down under attack. Democratic strategists are already considering her for higher office, Senate, Attorney General, or beyond. One thing is certain, Jasmine Crockett is no longer just a freshman congresswoman. She has become a force in national politics. For Tim Scott, the path ahead is less certain. His presidential ambitions suffered a major blow. His credibility on legal and constitutional matters has been questioned, and every future opponent now knows they can cite this hearing as evidence that Scott's polished public persona can crumble under genuine scrutiny. More importantly, this exchange reshaped the conversation around expertise in politics. It proved that legal training matters, that careful preparation beats charisma alone, and that voters crave substance over style. The voting rights legislation that triggered this hearing is still under debate, but now every discussion references Crockett's testimony, her legal reasoning, and the real-world examples she provided. Scott's attempt to dismiss her credentials spectacularly backfired, inadvertently amplifying her message. This exchange teaches several vital lessons for anyone navigating political or professional challenges. Never underestimate your opponent. Scott assumed he could easily dismiss Crockett, and that mistake cost him dearly. Preparation beats personality. Crockett's legal training gave her tools that no political polish could match. Facts matter in a world of sound bites. Her precise, factual responses cut through the noise and silenced critics. Recognize when you are outmatched. Scott's error wasn't only in the initial attack, but in continuing to engage when he was clearly losing. Expertise is power. Legal knowledge and real-world experience trump rhetoric alone. Months from now, this hearing will be remembered not just as a viral political moment or an embarrassment for Scott, but as a pivotal example of how expertise can dominate political debate. Law schools will study it as a case of courtroom skills applied in politics. Political science courses will reference it as a lesson in strategy and preparation. Young people, especially women of color, will see it as proof that courage, preparation, and knowledge can overcome intimidation. Tim Scott entered that hearing thinking he could score easy political points. He left having learned a painful lesson about the difference between theatrical politics and real expertise. America witnessed Jasmine Crockett demonstrate that the most powerful response to condescension isn't anger, it's precision. He laughed at her law degree, and her next words destroyed his credibility. In doing so, she may have changed the game for future politicians. Thanks for watching this incredible political showdown. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more explosive political drama. Who do you think will face Jasmine Crockett next? Share your predictions in the comments below.
This is how you respond to bad faith attacks, with facts, precision, and complete control of your expertise. Conservative outlets attempted to spin the exchange, some claiming Scott had been ambushed or Crockett was disrespectful. But privately, many acknowledged Scott had seriously miscalculated. One Fox News contributor even tweeted, then quickly deleted, that sometimes you just need to recognize when you're out of match. Mainstream news couldn't ignore it. CNN, MSNBC, and even some conservative networks ran segments analyzing the hearing, bringing in legal analysts to explain why Crockett's approach was so effective. This wasn't just a political comeback, one MSNBC legal analyst noted. This was a trained attorney using courtroom skills to completely dismantle her opponent's credibility. The Washington Post ran a detailed piece titled "When Legal Expertise Meets Political Theater: How Jasmine Crockett Turned the Tables on Tim Scott," highlighting her career and the trend of attorneys entering politics with the ability to challenge traditional politicians. The New York Times framed it as "Scott's Stumble Highlights Republican Vulnerability on Voting Rights," emphasizing how unprepared Republicans were to defend their legislation against well-founded legal critique. Even The Atlantic published an in-depth analysis calling Crockett part of a new generation of black women politicians, alongside leaders like Stacey Abrams and Ayanna Pressley, blending legal skill, lived experience, and political savvy. The fallout went far beyond social media. Politically, it reshaped the discussion around voting rights legislation. For Tim Scott, the impact was immediate. His carefully constructed image as a thoughtful conservative voice was damaged. Donors asked questions, colleagues quietly distanced themselves, and his presidential ambitions suffered a major setback. "This is what happens when you underestimate your opponent," a Republican strategist told Politico. What he thought would be an easy political win became a public misstep, giving Democrats one of their most significant moments in months. For Crockett, the exchange launched her into national prominence. Campaign donations surged, progressive organizations invited her to major events, and Democratic leadership began considering her for higher office. More importantly, she shifted the conversation around voting rights. Instead of Republicans controlling the narrative about election security, Crockett became a powerful advocate, articulating the real-world consequences of voter suppression, with authority built from courtroom experience. Within weeks, she was included in critical Democratic strategy meetings, her legal expertise and national profile making her an indispensable voice in shaping both messaging and substance for voting rights proposals. Beyond politics, the hearing highlighted something deeper about American governance. It showcased what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when genuine expertise confronts empty rhetoric, and when someone refuses to be diminished by bad faith attacks. For black women in politics who are constantly questioned on their qualifications and right to participate, Crockett's response offered a blueprint. Answer with facts, confidence, and preparation that leaves no room for dismissal. Legal experts even suggested her tactics to redefine how attorneys operate in political arenas. Rather than relying on talking points or sound bites, she demonstrated the power of courtroom strategy, precise language, systematic dismantling of arguments, and unwavering focus on facts. What unfolded in that Senate hearing may well represent the future of political debate. A Georgetown law professor even argued in an op-ed that Crockett's approach exemplified how legal precision can dominate political theater. As more lawyers step into politics, we can expect to see more exchanges like this one, where knowledge and preparation outweigh showmanship, where expertise truly matters, and where you can't just smile and bluff your way through a debate. In the days after the hearing, Tim Scott struggled to regain composure. He appeared on Fox News attempting to frame the exchange as a passionate discussion on voting rights. The tension in the Senate hearing room was palpable, and social media exploded as hashtag Jasmine Crockett and hashtag Tim Scott began trending worldwide. The general consensus was clear. Scott had been completely outmatched. He sat frozen, trying to figure out how to regain control, but his political instincts, usually sharp, had failed him entirely. He had walked straight into a trap he didn't see coming, underestimating Crockett's expertise and overestimating his own standing. The committee chairman attempted to intervene. "Perhaps we should take a brief recess." "No," Crockett said firmly, cutting him off. "I came here to provide testimony on voting rights legislation. And I intend to do exactly that unless Senator Scott has further questions about my credentials." She looked Scott directly in the eye, her expression daring him to respond. The room held its collective breath. Scott opened his mouth, then shut it again. For the first time in his political career, he had nothing to say. "That's what I thought," Crockett said quietly, the microphone capturing her words perfectly.
Applause erupted from corners of the gallery, something almost unheard of in a Senate hearing. She then delivered her prepared testimony with precise and devastating effect. Every argument was rooted in legal precedent, backed by constitutional analysis, and reinforced with real-world examples from her legal career. "The legislation you are considering today," she said, voice steady and strong, "would undo decades of progress in voting rights. It would disproportionately impact Black and brown communities, just as similar laws have throughout American history. And I don't speak as a politician, I speak as an attorney who has seen firsthand the effects of voter suppression." She outlined specific cases: elderly voters denied at the polls, communities losing polling places without notice, registration purges disproportionately targeting certain neighborhoods. Each point was presented like a closing argument, precise and undeniable. Scott, still visibly shaken, attempted one more interjection. "Representative, aren't you being somewhat dramatic?" Crockett's eyes flashed. "Senator, I represented a 73-year-old woman who had voted in every election since 1965. In 2018, she was told her registration was invalid because of a signature mismatch, written with arthritic hands. That is not dramatic. It is reality. And this legislation amplifies that reality." Scott had no response, and neither did the other Republican senators. They had expected an easy political win, only to be outmaneuvered by a legal mind executing a flawless strategy. By the end of her testimony, the energy in the room had completely shifted. Republican senators sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact, while Democrats barely concealed their satisfaction. Jotting down notes to capture every word, Scott left the hearing quietly through a side exit, avoiding the press. His staff scrambled with vague statements about productive dialogue, which fooled no one. Meanwhile, Crockett calmly packed her briefcase as reporters swarmed her with questions. "Senator Scott questioned my credentials. I responded with facts. If he feels embarrassed, perhaps he should reconsider how he approaches serious policy discussions." She told one reporter her response was perfect, measured, professional, and utterly devastating. Within minutes, clips of the hearing went viral. Social media exploded. Memes flooded Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. The line, "You couldn't even pass the bar exam yourself," spread like wildfire, racking up millions of views. Hashtag Jasmine Crockett trended at #1 worldwide, with hashtag Tim Scott following, though less flatteringly. Memes showed Scott defeated in various humorous ways, and one viral tweet summed it up. Tim Scott tried to question a civil rights attorney's credentials and got absolutely destroyed. This is what happens when you bring a political science degree to a law fight. Legal Twitter went into overdrive, and the reactions were brutal but earned. Verified accounts from law professors, practicing attorneys, and legal analysts flooded the platform with praise for Crockett, calling her performance a masterclass in handling a hostile opponent. One trial advocacy professor wrote, "I'm showing this clip to my students."
Republicans knew she was a threat, smart, articulate, prepared, and fearless. So Scott tried to undercut her early, hoping to unsettle her before she could deliver her testimony. But he made one fatal mistake. He assumed she was just another politician. He had no idea he was facing a trained lawyer who could turn a hostile cross-examination into a precise, devastating response. The clip of Scott's initial remark was already going viral on social media. Conservative commentators celebrated it as another example of Scott dominating a Democrat. But they had no clue what was about to happen next. The real confrontation hadn't even begun. Scott tried to regain his composure, sitting a little straighter, attempting a smile, though it lacked the earlier confidence. "Representative Crockett," he said, his tone now carrying a sharper edge, "I think you're deflecting from the main issue here." "Am I deflecting?" Crockett interrupted smoothly, raising her voice just enough to command attention. "Or am I simply pointing out that you started this exchange by questioning my credentials when you have absolutely no standing to do so?" She'd carefully opened a folder from her briefcase, letting the suspense build. Every camera captured the movement. Senators on the panel leaned forward, suddenly alert. Nothing was going as planned. "Let's talk about credentials," Senator Crockett continued, calm yet unyielding. "I graduated from law school. I passed the bar on my first attempt. I practiced law for over 10 years, focusing on civil rights cases.
I have argued in state courts, federal courts, and appellate courts. What about you, Senator? What is your legal experience again?" She paused, letting the question sink in. "Oh, right, you don't have any. No law school, no bar exam, no courtroom experience representing a client." Whispers swept through the gallery. Democratic staffers barely contained their reactions, while Republican aides scrambled on their phones to check Crockett's facts. Senator Ted Cruz, seated next to Scott, leaned in to whisper something, but Scott waved him off. He was on his own. "Representative, I don't think," Scott started again. "No," Senator Crockett cut him off sharply. "Let me finish. This matters. You stood here trying to humiliate me by implying I don't understand the Constitution. Let me tell you what I know." She held up a document. "This is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I've litigated cases under this law. I've defended clients whose voting rights were stripped away by the very type of legislation you support. I've argued constitutional law in courtrooms while you were giving speeches at fundraisers." The tension in the room transformed into electricity. Everyone understood they were witnessing a historic moment. This was more than politics. It was methodical, precise, and devastating. Scott's face darkened from red to nearly purple as he gripped his pen so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This is highly irregular," he stammered. "What's irregular?" Crockett shot back. "Is it irregular for a senator with no legal experience to lecture an actual attorney about credentials? The irregularity is you judging my education when you wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real courtroom." Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock tried to hide a smile. "I think the representative has made her point. Senator Scott, maybe we should move on to the testimony." But Crockett wasn't finished. "Actually, Senator Warnock, I want to fully answer Senator Scott's question about my education. The American people deserve to know who is qualified to speak on these issues and who is just playing politics." She turned back to Scott, her voice calm but deadly. "Senator, you asked if they taught me about the Constitution in law school. The answer is yes. They taught me all 3 articles. They taught me the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. They taught me the 5th Amendment protecting voting rights. They taught me to read Supreme Court precedent, analyze statutory language, and construct legal arguments. And most importantly, they taught me to recognize when someone is completely out of their depth, which is exactly where you are right now." The gallery erupted. Order couldn't be restored. Social media exploded with clips shared and reshared thousands of times within minutes.